Hey everyone, Shawn here, and I'm afraid I don't have some good news for you. We were just in the hospital for most of the weekend, and Keaton has C Diff. So before we get started, I just wanted to issue a warning that some of what we talk about or some of the footage that we show, some people may find it disturbing or just plain gross. So exercise viewer discretion. C. diff, for those of you that don't know, is a GI infection that can be caused by being on antibiotics. It can be caused by being in the hospital. People who already have compromised immune systems or are being treated for another condition are very prone to it. And it leads to some really bad diarrhea, gas, with a very putrid smell, very hard to keep clean, and it's very contagious. It's transferred through spores that are not easy to kill. In fact, it's easier to wash them away than it is to kill them. So the good news is that little Eva here is not that prone to it because she's perfectly healthy and has a strong immune system. She's not on any drugs and she's not being treated for any previous conditions. We do have to watch closely though, just to be sure if she starts getting diarrhea or anything like that. But even if she does get it, chances are that someone as healthy as her would be able to get through it in about 3 days. So how is it that Keaton ended up with C. diff? Well, the truth is, we don't really know. What I can tell you is the sequence of events that led up to his diagnosis. So if you go back a few weeks ago, Keaton had a urinary tract infection, and we got a prescribed antibiotic to fight that, which cleared up, and he was fine. But then a few days after that, he started to get a head cold. We took him out of school for a couple of days until that cleared up, and he seemed to be doing fine again, so we sent him back to school for about a week. And then, from seemingly out of nowhere, he just started getting this really bad, watery, disgusting smelling diarrhea and gas. And we thought maybe it's related to the virus that he just had a few days before. That was on the weekend. We waited until that Monday and took him to the doctor's office because his doctor can book same-day appointments for us. When we took him in, she looked him over and said that this appears to be a virus. Just keep him hydrated, give him Pedialyte, slow down his feeds for now because they seem to be just making things worse until he starts to get better, and if he doesn't get better, then to take him to the hospital to get looked at. We did that, and in a few days his diarrhea started to look better. His stools were getting slightly more formed, so we thought he's starting to get better, we'll start up his feeds again. We started his feeds again, and then all heck broke loose. It just looked terrible. It was worse than it ever was before. And we were debating whether or not we should take him to the hospital at this point. And while we were debating that, we had to change him, which if you're wondering how we change him, you can check the video at the link at the top of your screen. If you know Keaton, you know he has a vesicostomy, and while we were changing him, we opened him up and his bladder prolapsed through vesicostomy opening. And Sarah and I were both kind of going, okay, what is that? That's not right. I was looking at her saying, I don't know what caused that, but that's not supposed to happen. So not only did we take him to the hospital, we called the ambulance. We called 911, they sent an ambulance, sirens wailing and everything, and came and the paramedics came in, took him out to the ambulance. Sarah went to the ambulance with him. I loaded up his wheelchair and everything into the van and met them at the hospital. We got there and explained to them everything that was happening over the past couple weeks, and that the bladder prolapse thing happened. They looked him over, contacted urology about the bladder prolapse, but they were also concerned about his electrolyte levels, so they took a blood sample. His sodium was fine, his potassium was low. Then we heard back from urology, and they said that the prolapse is actually not that concerning. Because it only happened once, it's okay. It was probably because of all the gas and fluid that was moving through him caused his stomach to become quite distended. In fact, Sarah and I noticed that a few times. We were going, yeah, his stomach looks a lot bigger than usual. Then he'd have a really bad bout of diarrhea and gas, and then all of a sudden, hey, it's back to normal size. I wonder why.
That ended up causing so much pressure that the bladder ended up kind of getting pushed out. When his electrolyte levels came back low, they started an IV for potassium, and then we waited a few hours. They took another blood test. It hadn't moved at all. We waited another few hours. They took another blood test. It moved up 1 decimal point, which was not nearly enough to go home. So they said, okay, we're going to admit you. But before they did that, they took a stool sample and told us they were specifically going to check for C Diff. So we got admitted to a hospital room. He continued on the IV. We waited for the C Diff test to come back. And then they made some decisions that I would consider to be quite questionable. So the magic number we were looking for with the potassium was anything above 3.2 and holding is good. And they did another draw and found that his numbers shot up to about 4.6. But rather than just stopping the IV and the potassium altogether, they changed the dosage to a lower one because they wanted to make sure that he was holding at that level and would be good to go. So then the IV went interstitial, and Sarah managed to convince them to not start a new one because we were about 2 hours away from doing another blood test. So they reached a compromise where they decided they would wait until the blood draw and try and start an IV at the same time. And when they did, they had a hard time getting a good poke in Keaton because he's just really hard to get IV starts or blood draws from. It's just the way his body is. He's not easy to get blood out of or to put an IV into. And all those multiple pokes led to a lot of bruising on his arms. But they managed to start another IV site, which I kind of question as to whether or not that was even necessary because they only wanted it there in case he needed to start IV fluids again. The results from the blood draw came back and his potassium was up to about 5.6, which is a lot higher than it should be. Starting to become questionable as to whether or not he needed to stay another night and if they needed to give him some kind of medication to help bring it down. Luckily, our pediatrician was in the hospital at the time, and she knows us well enough to know when we're pretty well sick and tired of things and want to go home. And she talked to the doctors on the floor and said, no, they can go home. They can do a blood draw the day after. If it starts coming down, then they're fine. And we got to go home, thankfully, and we're able to do the blood draw just yesterday. Again, though, when we went to get the blood draw done, it was hard to get it done. It took 2 attempts, and that just leads to more pokes and bruises on Keaton's arms, and he's just looking like he got into a really bad street fight or something right now. So we left the hospital and with the proper diagnosis of C. diff, and we're given this prescription, antibiotic called metronidazole or metronidazole. I'm not exactly sure how it's pronounced. But we have to give him 2.2 mils of this through his G-tube 4 times a day for 10 days to clear out the C. diff. We are keeping him out of school for the remainder of the week for 2 reasons. He's contagious while he has the diarrhea, and we want to give his arms a chance to heal up. We're going to wait and send him back to school next week when he's 100% better and we've had a chance to clean the whole house, sanitize everything, contain the C. diff, and make sure it's completely gone. Because even though perfectly healthy people don't get affected by it that badly, we'd rather not risk spreading it to the kids in his kindergarten class who might take it home to a family member who's being treated for something or who has a previous condition where the C. diff could affect them just as bad as it did Keaton. He has lost some weight because of this. He's lost almost 1 kilogram, which doesn't sound like much, but when you're only 15.9 kilograms, that's a lot of your body weight. So we're working on getting that back up. Back on full feeds now, and not watered down feeds. He's off the Pedialyte, and he's doing a lot better. As you can see, he's feisty again. He's not lethargic anymore. I see no reason why he won't be back to school after Remembrance Day. Yeah, I do want to give a special shout out to the kids and the parents of Keaton's kindergarten class. The kids put together this nice little get well soon card, and good on the kids for doing that. But you don't need to worry, Keaton's getting a lot better and he will be back to school before you know it. Thanks so much for watching. Stay tuned for our next video where I'm going to show you how to contain a C. diff outbreak within your home, how to remove those and kill those nasty spores. If you like this video, click the subscribe button right here, and also check out these other videos over here. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, bye!